Hi everyone, it's me again, Haider Al-Mansury. Today's presentation is one of the presentations that have to do with chapter 2 from your textbook. You should remember that chapter 2 has to do with the exploration of teaching. Today I'm going to talk about only observation, and probably you remember that observation is one of the most important ways with which you can explore teaching. It is very important to point out that as teachers, we should gain knowledge of ourselves. However, we need the courage to seek that knowledge. And also, we need the humility to accept what we discover. Of course, this idea is taken directly from the book When Teachers Face Themselves. It's an interesting publication. So it is very important to gain knowledge about ourselves, and to do that, to gain the knowledge about ourselves, we need the courage to seek it, and of course, the humility to accept what we will find out. Observation is also very important because it directly contributes to the teacher's effectiveness. In other words, your classroom instructional practice is very essential factor that could determine how effective you are as a teacher. In chapter 1, when we talked about the self-developed language teacher, it is very important to achieve deep awareness of the teaching process in general. And to do that, it is very critical to know the observation cycle and to break it down into the basic components. And you, as a teacher, you could follow the process, which consists of 4 steps. The first one is collecting descriptive examples of your teaching or someone else's teaching, as we stated earlier. These samples could be analyzed. Once you have collected the descriptive examples and you have analyzed them, it's time for step 2. In step 2, you reflect and interpret the results of the samples, of the descriptive samples that you've collected. This is very important. So step 2 is reflecting on the results and interpreting them. The third step in the observation cycle is to create an alternative plan to your class, to the way you teach your class. Now keep in mind the basic idea of doing observation is to enhance your effectiveness as a teacher. And of course, to do that, you need to probably change a few things here and there in your instructional behavior, or even just to enhance the ones that you're already practicing. The fourth step in the observation cycle is to implement the new plan. Once you create it, then you need to implement it to carry out the plan when you teach, and this cycle goes back to the first step with which we started. Now, all these 4 steps happen while you're teaching. So you're teaching, you teach, and at the same time, you observe your classes. As I stated before, you could do that by videotaping your classes, recording your classes, and probably there is more than one way to do that. Now I will talk about each step of the observation cycle in more details. The first step, collecting samples of teaching. Now to do that, you need to ask descriptive questions in order to acquire descriptive samples to be analyzed. One of the important questions that could be helpful in achieving this step, for example, number 1, how do I give instructions? So this has to do with the way you instruct your students. What do students do after receiving the instructions? Or how often do students speak their native language? What is the content of the questions? How long do I wait after asking a question to get a response? How do I praise students? How much time do students stay on task? What are usual seating arrangements in my class? You can think of other questions. But basically, these 7 could cover this step of, or they could help you in collecting the descriptive samples that you need in order to analyze them. The second step, analyzing the samples of teaching. Now you need to keep in mind that your analysis depends on why you started the class observation. Your analysis has to do with your aim. You could focus on a certain aspect of your class to be analyzed. But to relate to the key factors in the self-development of a language teacher, there we stated that to develop yourself as a teacher, it would be a good idea to explore for the exploration's sake. So you could start self-observation and without anything specific in mind, and you analyze, pay attention to what goes on in your class. Or sometimes you have a specific problem, or you have a specific area in your class that you need to develop or work on or to enhance, and therefore you carried out a self-observation. Either way, your analysis for the samples that you've collected depends on the purpose with which, because of which we started the observation in the first place. The third step of the observation cycle is the interpretation and reflection. To interpret the results that you discovered and reflect on them at the same time. In other words, you need to make sense of the descriptions of a classroom interactions that you have already collected. And to do that, to interpret the results and reflect on them at the same time, You could ask, how does the interaction in my class provide chances for students to learn the language? Also, you could ask, how does the interaction possibly block students from learning the language? What are my beliefs about teaching? Are my teaching practices consistent with my beliefs? This is very important. Also, you could ask, do I do what I think I do in the classroom? This is very crucial. That was the third step. The fourth one is creating changes in your teaching behavior. This is the last step in the observation cycle. And in order to do that, also you could ask yourself a few basic questions. For example, you could ask, what do I want to continue to do in your classroom, of course, and what small changes do I want to make in my teaching behavior? So again, as I told you, the idea is to achieve high um, effectiveness when it comes to your um, teaching, and what you do and how you do it. That is your instructional or practice inside the class could be a determining factor. So you need to create changes to and adjust your plans to achieve high level of effectiveness in your teaching. This is the end of this presentation. Please let me know if you have any questions.